So when you start looking at payments, right, earlier it was a very close ecosystem, right? Not anybody and everybody could be a participant. Parties were very clearly defined. They had to be specific kind of entities and all of that. So there, the regulators played a very strong role of ensuring that when you're doing, like, for example, physical payments, right, and you're using card terminals and all of that, because it was a controlled environment, there were a set of regulations, there were a set of standards that were put in place that allowed people to come into something that was very well defined, ensure that that's being done, and then implement that and take it out there, right? But when digital
Hello everyone, welcome back to the GB Show, powered by QRC Assurance and Solution Private Limited. Today, I am going to talk about the booming payment industry. We have seen hundreds and hundreds of solutions coming in the payment industry. Billions of transactions are happening. Fintechs are growing and many startups are coming in this way. So we want to understand what technology is getting used there, what kind of compliances are there, and regulations. To have a discussion on this topic, I have with me an amazing personality, Mr. Rajeev Narayana, the Global Chief Technology Officer, Cloud Platform and Global Solutions in Ingenico. Rajeev brings a wealth of experience from various sectors including payments, fintech and technology. He is responsible for driving innovation and transformation in payment platforms, focusing on creating robust payment platform as a service. Joining Rajeev in this discussion, we have Vamsi Krishna Maramganti, the founder and CEO of QRC Assurance and Solution Private Limited. We will be discussing on current trend and challenges in payment technologies, as well as critical cybersecurity measures organizations must adopt to safeguard their operations. So, swipe right on security and understand the future of payments and cyber threats. Let's hear them out. Vamsi, Rajeev, welcome to the GB Show. Welcome, sir. So, thanks for hosting us again. And Rajeev, how was your travel overall?
travels have been good.
So you keep coming to India?
Yeah, I'm based out of India and I travel abroad and come back from time to time.
Okay, fair enough. Means you keep going out of India.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
way.
I have a global role, so it requires me to travel.
Okay, Rajeev, I think I've just looked into your profile and that's quite impressive. And from last 22 years, you are specifically dedicatedly working into payment industry, right? And you have seen that how technology is shaping up the future of payment industry. But I would like to learn from you what you have seen in past, and how it shaped up, and what is the future look like.
So I think payments has really come up like anything, right? If you really look at something, a domain which has really leapfrogged globally, it has been payments. And I think it got the right kind of impetus because commerce started going online, right? And as commerce went online, as you know, you can't do any business without paying for things. So people need to get paid. So the exchange of money became more and more important, right? And since this was now happening on an electronic and then subsequently a digital form factor, from online websites, portals to mobile applications, which is the name of the game today. And also what is going to go into IoT now, where fridges will possibly auto order that you're out of eggs and milk, right? As we talk about that use case quite a bit. I think that's happening, right? So payments needed to leapfrog. In the initial days, right, payments was something that used to happen very reliably, very consistently. So we had a lot of these networks, networks like SWIFT, where money could move, right? So there was solidarity and solidity, I think, so a stability in terms of how money was worked upon in the banking ecosystem, and there were networks that were facilitating that in the back end, right? Subsequently, what started happening was we wanted to connect more and more of the ecosystem together so that commerce can happen, right? And which fundamentally then meant that money also needs to move with that same level of efficiency. But I think so one more dimension that got added was experience, right? You want to do this as seamlessly as simply and as securely as possible. And while it is very easy to say these three S's, right, it takes a lot to get this done. So I think there has been a tremendous amount of evolution, right, and leapfrogging that has happened. And there have been some markets that have led certain things really well. India as well, right? And India is very well known for the innovation, the India stack, and what we have been able to achieve here. So very, very proud about it. And having been a part of it for some time, from the inception to now, is great. And it's also great to see how this is going to the rest of the world. As you can see, our Prime Minister has visited. He's working more closely with a lot of other governments. And you can now see UPI in Dubai, you can see UPI in various other places. So I think it's fantastic.
Amazing, and I think everyone in the India specifically now using QR code payments, and the innovation is not just limited to one particular set of people. It has gone to the ground level, tier 2, tier 3, rural areas as well. Everyone is using these things, and with the most of the companies doing some innovations and using technologies in the payment industry. Maybe Vamsi, I would like to know from you that how was your experience, because you are working very closely with this industry, and how the payment industry has evolved overall, what Rajeev has said. Apart from that, what you have seen and what your observations have been?
No, definitely there is a tremendous growth happened, developments happened. Okay, in the payment industry. If I look at that, when I started, payment industry assessment and all this stuff, almost like 1 decade back, and now the kind of payment transactions are happening across not only domestic and international level. There is a lot many new technologies came into the existence. At the same time, because since we are from the security and this background, definitely the amount of the breaches or the causes of the breaches has also increased tremendously, because everything is now online. Okay. Like for example, the kind of an attacking surface is increased a lot because of everybody using, earlier days it is like when you want to do some transaction, you have to physically go some place and, identify yourself. You are the authorized person to do the particular transaction. But because of these innovations, that entire thing changed now. Okay, it's everything is on virtual or the online, and that's where that kind of attacks also increased. The frauds increased. So now, along with the innovations, definitely the organizations also fighting for that. How to avoid such kind of frauds and breaches. Okay. So yes, definitely the usage of the payments increased a lot because of thanks to the UPI. Even rural places also, people are online transactions are happening more and more. And as per the recent one of the article where I understood that it's only still it is a 26% or something. It's not at 100%. 26%. This is a vast amount of transactions are happening across India and even abroad also.
Fair enough. And Rajeev, when you were talking about the innovation in the payment industry solutions and all, right? How the organization, or from your experience, are taking care that the security and scalability is it's in the mind, or how they are progressing in that particular domain? Because Vamsi has touched about the threat landscape. I would like to understand that what is happening over in the payment industry specifically.
So in the payment industry, right? So it's very, very clear that we talked about experience and efficiency, right? Both are important. They go hand in hand. You can't disconnect one from the other, because then it becomes unviable, right? So it's been very important to kind of look at innovation as a responsible innovation rather than just any innovation, right? There are so many use cases to solve for. And when you start thinking about those use cases, you also start thinking about payments differently, right? So which led to people to think about new payment methods, new options, right? Earlier people were thinking cards or bank transfers as two very distinct things, but now you see that both are being interchangeably used. Now you got things like real-time payments, right? Which was not really the name of the game before, right? Even card payments would happen, you would have an authorization today, but then how the settlement would come in and so on and so forth. So the speed of transaction and is almost instant now. So when you look at when we talked about IMPS, we used to call it as immediate payments, and now we are talking about instant payments, right? So just that kind of thinking and that kind of shift has led to the payment modalities change quite a bit, right? So new payment method or option would operate differently because it is towards something, right? And with this explosion of all these kind of use cases, whether it's coming to lending, credit, right, which is going digital, almost every product has gone digital, whether you want to buy an insurance policy or whether you want to trade and you want to go and buy shares today. So it has to be instant deposit, instant things like that, right? So you start really thinking about debit, credit instruments, but beyond instruments, you really start look at the explosion of payment methods and options. And when this has happened, and because channels have also exploded, right, which started happening in banking a little earlier, the channel explosion also increased the surface area, because if you are improving the usage, you are also increasing the channels, the surface area that is for access, like Vamsi said, and that access surface, when it increases, how do you then ensure the same trust in the payment process is ensured, right? Because at the end of the day, trust is the strategic advantage, and that's something that you don't lose, because the financial safety, the people that they feel that when they're transacting, that what they're doing is clean, simple, safe, right, is going to be very important. So that has increased the things, and like Vamsi said, the vectors of attacks have just increased, because while we talk about payments and a lot of this, right, how educated is the average user? So you look at phishing attacks, you look at social engineering, right, you look at so many other things, social media, right, people call you, ask you for OTPs, educated people are giving away OTPs, right, and it is a well engineered concept in terms of attack vectors and how they carry it out. So there is obviously a big gap there. Recently, I think so, the SBI MD also made a statement in the newspaper saying that we haven't invested enough in the security infrastructure. And by that, it was not just about what the bank was doing, but it's also a call out to all of us to say that what are we doing to improve the security infrastructure across the industry, so that with the expansion and scale and the explosion that we have seen in the payments domain, right, and in the commerce domain, and because these two talk to each other so implicitly and so closely, it's very, very important to get that together. So I think, and that's the reason why how we look at security also needs to evolve, right? It cannot just be that payments and everything is so keeping pace with these innovations and ensuring that security is also innovating at a pace which allows us to do these things well with all the people who are participant into this in the ecosystem, consumers, providers, intermediaries alike, right? So you see faster payments today, you see lots of explosion of payment methods and options, you are seeing more digital channels and so on and so forth, right? So like we talked about data, volume, variety, variety and all of those things, we are seeing that in payments as well.
Yeah, exactly, and I think regulations are also playing a lot. So, Vamsi, here we are learning about the speed of the payment industry, how it's growing. So, is the regulation industry have the same speed? How they are coping it? With this?
Obviously, if you talk about the regulators, at least in the Indian context point of view, the Reserve Bank of India has come out. I mean, almost it's been 4 or 5 years. The first time they provided a guidelines wherein all the innovator companies, the fintech companies, or even the banks, they have to they circulated that they have to follow certain payment industry standards to protect this entire transactions. So they recommended organizations to adopt this the best practices standards like PCI DSS, and that time it is a PADSS, but now it's become a PCSSF for the application layer, protecting the application layer and applications, and then from the PIN transaction security and also the point-to-point encryption. So from the regulatory point of view, yes, they are already emphasizing that. Not only that, the different payment channels like the instruments, the wallet companies, the prepaid instrument channels also. Okay, there are a lot of transactions are happening nowadays. Earlier it was not like that. Okay, you have to put a money and you have to spend that money from the PPI instrument, whatever it is. But now you can do lot many things. Lot many paying different merchants, and you can use the credit, debit cards, and all the types of different channels they integrated now. So with respect to that, the RBI is actually taking certain stand on that, and time to time they're guiding industries to what to follow and what to do and what not to do. So this is already RBI into that. But yes, you see, every time it's not 100%, right? It's always it is a improvement, and the new things come out, and accordingly the new practices we have to follow to protect that security. So that's what it is.
Fair enough. And Rajiv, as you were talking about innovation and Vamsi is talking about the regulation. So now regulations are becoming more stricter day by day, and we have seen earlier, people used to say that there will be if there is a good business, then there are regulations. But now we seeing that RBI saying if there are regulations, then there is business, right? So how it has impacted on the innovation, or two things I will like to know from you, that where you find that okay, because there were good regulations, these things actually went flawless, and then you will say because there were regulations, it was quite challenging. Two use cases or anything which you would like to share.
Yeah. Okay. I think let me talk in the India context with you,
Sure.
right? And then let's try to see how the global context ties in. So when you start looking at payments, right? Earlier it was a very close ecosystem, right? Not anybody and everybody could be a participant. Parties were very clearly defined. They had to be specific kind of entities, and all of that. So there, the regulators played a very strong role of ensuring that when you're doing, like for example, physical payments, right, and you're using card terminals and all of that, because it was a controlled environment, there were a set of regulations, there were a set of standards that were put in place that allowed people to come into something that was very well defined, ensure that that's being done, and then implement that and take it out there, right? But when digital happened, right, you got in a lot of channels which were not necessarily your own. Like for example, when banks started building internet banking systems, you owned that software, you owned that channel, you could control what happened over there. You could control how it talked to your systems. You could literally ironclad everything around it and play it safe, and you could evolve it in a particular way. When I look at regulators, right, I think one of the brilliant things that RBI has done, right, is that they've always been a very inclusive regulator. So, for example, when they allowed wallets, right, they said we'll allow wallets. It can be an innovation that can really have a social impact. It can be an innovation that can do well for India, right? Now, obviously, they regulate the banks. There was no regulation written for wallets because these were not really considered payment systems. These are considered as something that can append to that and work with that, right? Because the back end is always going to be a bank, which RBI has regulations with, and everything can work in a good way. But they were smart enough to say that, we will support this till it becomes systemic.
Okay.
Which is when we will bring in regulations and rules and figure out a way to get these as proper entities that can come in, because when you're trying something new, you don't know how much this is going to grow or how well it is going to grow or what are the things that need to be addressed, right? They were pragmatic, but at the same time they were forward. I think it has done this country great things. It's given this country fantastic stuff because of that, right? Imagine the amount of acceleration we got in terms of inclusion, in terms of people who don't have bank accounts who can still do transactions and things like that, right? So effectively, after a point in time, they regulated wallets. They said you can have fully KYC'd wallets. It's as good as a bank account. Start using this. There are transaction limits which are higher, right? And then you could use the wallets for so many other kind of things. And now you have an opportunity where you put the wallets behind the same stack that secures the banks, right? And it makes it a much better, cleaner, regulated, safe, and extensible ecosystem, right? And they also made sure that the systemic players remain. People who are not serious about it, who could not regulate, they took them out. You also heard them take a hard stance with larger players who had the money but who were not doing what was required to be done. And you saw them cancel their licenses or suspend their licenses and get them in order so that things can happen well. So this is an example, right, of how there can be public-private partnership, right, and how the balancing can happen. The incorporation of NPCI itself is a fantastic thing. Now you try to think about things that NPCI is incorporated by the top banks, so they will rule the roost. But if you look at the UPI stack, the way it is built and everything has been, every bank is participant. Every bank can run a credible acquiring business. Every bank can serve their own customers better. Every bank can also serve customers that they don't have, right? So it kind of created a democratization of things. So we saw things like this, then there was AEPS, then there was BBPS. So a lot of these things, and I think fantastic is that they did not just apply to one part, right? There's CBDC, right, for commerce. So everything was kind of bought in, and they really created some very strong vehicles, right, from where responsible innovation can be done, and then it could be spread, things could be democratized, it could become more inclusive, and they build scale. So today, if you have to do so many billions of transactions in UPI, you can imagine the kind of scalability that is built in NPCI. Where at the end of the day, that's the network, that's also the backbone that all the people, participants, whether it's originators or on the issuing side, right, fulfillment side, everybody is connected to, right? So they've also gradually built up that infrastructure. They've given time to people. There are new players who have come in with great ideas. Fantastic use cases being developed as we are seeing, right? There are so many new fintechs, so many new digital products, right? The larger guys are able to bring in much more value into the ecosystem, and the connecting of the ecosystem itself is creating much more value. So I think this is a great example. This market is a fantastic example, and globally, wherever I've been, right, and when I talk to people, they are always asking me about the India story. Very interestingly, right, we had a discussion sometime back about Pix. So how Pix picked up from India and China, right, and how Pix is doing well, right, and you are seeing they're already about 24-25%, right, broadly from last I remember, where the transactions have already moved to this, right, to the Pix ecosystem, which is just like what we do with UPI and QR. And I think the success of the QR code ecosystem, see, India does it differently from China. If you look at both the tech architectures, the approach, right, how China has enabled the QR ecosystem and how it has tied in back, right, with one central entity versus how India has enabled, there are some subtle differences. But these are important differences. But both proved that this kind of a leapfrogging, connecting to a QR code, connecting it into social apps and other things, can create a fantastic acceptance as well as a provider ecosystem. And I think that's a success for us to all see.
Amazing. I think you have touched a point like where India's fintech system and Vamsi, like Rajeev is mentioning, there are so many payment products which are coming in market, and then everyone is newbie and they need to understand compliance and load many challenges over there. What are the few things you think they are missing out on, or maybe they should be taking care if they are into the fintech or getting a new product? Maybe from the compliance perspective, what are the critical vulnerabilities people miss or they should be taking care of?
Okay, this is a fantastic question.
I always ask fantastic.
I know that. So you see, there are a lot of fintech companies are coming out, and one thing is, like already Raju just mentioned the payment ecosystem. For example, the prepaid instruments. Okay, so there are certain acts are there. A PSS Act. It's almost like 2007. Established that. Now it became more and more popular with new added things. Okay, generally what is happened, the main challenge for the fintech companies when they come out with some kind of innovative product or anything. So first thing they want to launch that on a very with a very limited timelines and as a business. You see, it's for them it is a business. But what actually the main challenge is here, they have to comply certain rules and regulations, because the kind of a money which they are handling, it is a public money. Definitely there is a regulators. Okay. Obviously, when the public, they are aware or they are not aware, but the regulators are very keen to understand whether this kind of companies are following the certain practices or not. As Rajeev also very mentioned, certain companies they didn't follow the certain guidelines or the practices. Even the RBI taken very strict actions against them, right? So here is always like when we do certain kind of assessments or because before they get the licenses, let me tell you, like for example, there is a fintech company, they want to launch their product, the PPI instrument, for example. Before that, when they apply for the kind of a licensing, by the time the RBI itself, they ask for certain compliances. They need to at least establish the compliance system, the governance system, risk-based system. So everything, then only they will get the license. After that, they have to manage that. But now the challenge is that this is not fully aware by most of these companies, because they have an idea, very good, fantastic idea. It's an innovative idea, and they want to launch. But they're actually missing that, what is the requirements in terms of, for example, the KYC. Like, if there is any prepared instrument I want to launch tomorrow, but I need to follow certain procedures to how know your customers. There is a process they have to follow, but they are not fully aware of that. The product is ready, but when they trying to get the license onboarded or with the banks or anything, then that point in time the compliance come into the picture, because since they are not compliant, that point in time the entire the designing will change. In my experience, when I don't want to name the company, but when we did that initial assessment for them as per this guidelines, the PSS guidelines, the PPI, there is a proper information system audit supposed to perform for the entire application. So when we are evaluating that point in time, what I understood that the KYC which the guidelines is mentioned by this act itself, it is not properly implemented. So this is very big challenge for them to that point in time, after all the development deployment happened, now it is ready for go for live. That point in time, changing the design is very challenge for any company. Okay, so this is where normally what always even RBI is also time to time they issue the guidelines, and even security experts, they have to consult the security companies or the companies who can help them to understand what is the requirement exactly. Okay, how to build that at the time of the design phase itself. Because after design and development, then it is any company, they face a lot of challenge. It's like a nightmare for them. Because again, everything you have to change from the specifications to designing to then development.
Exactly.
It is unnecessarily, it's a waste of time. And not only the time, energy, the entire time they will wasted, right? So my recommendation is that any such kind of a thing, they first need to understand what is the regulatory requirements applicable for them. Point number one, they have to, if they don't have the kind of a knowledge about that, at least they can take some subject matter experts help to understand what is the requirement. Once they understood that, then how to put it in their particular application or the product, okay, or the service, whatever it is. Okay, then only they should start all these things. So it should start at the time of the idea, the idea phase itself, not the deployment phase. Okay.
Fair enough. And Rajiv, specifically these regulation and compliances, when we are coming, they are like majorly across the globe, right? So from the technology perspective, if I talk about from the payment industry, what about the Indian or region of fintechs or the startups solving the cross-border payments, and what kind of challenges they face, or what kind of innovation or technology aspect is over there? Maybe from your experience, I would like to know, or even one thing I would like to know, that what is the India's perspective when you go and talk to the people abroad. So what they think that how the Indian ecosystem is working, startups, or what is they are bringing on board, and any problem or any challenges if you have seen in past for the cross border, because we have seen getting payments in, or putting it out of the India, it was quite complicated earlier. But any solutions around them, anything on that, I would love to know.
Okay. So, just I'll add a point to what Vamsi had said and get into this, right? Innovation and interpretation must meet. Okay. So, whenever you want to innovate, solve for a use case, of course, you need to have open thinking. You need to look at not something traditionally, but you need to understand why something is traditionally the way it is, right? But it is very important to take your innovation and the interpretation of what is in a domain, that needs to be married, and then the implementation should be visited. Most of the times when startups come up with ideas and all of that, right, it's engineering. It's okay, can we solve this in a new way or a different way? But it's very important, like Vamsi rightly said, is to ratify this and get the interpretations matched with the innovation, and then take the implementation out, because till then you don't have a credible product that you're taking out. And that's the point of responsible innovation, right? Yes, innovation is important, we can all move fast, it's great, but when you put stuff out where trust is key, right, you need to make sure that the innovation and interpretation must meet, and the implementation must meet what they require. So I think that's one important part. Now, leading into the question that you asked, right, how are we perceived, right, by the global ecosystem? As you know, right, there are a lot of foreign investors putting money into India. One very fundamental thing is it's a massive consumer market, right, and it is untapped in so many ways. We knew that we are so underserved in credit, for example. We know the potential of payments is that even if you have 10 payment gateway companies, you are still not serving the entire base. There is still a potential of reach, right? There's still a potential of use cases that have not been solved, which can be high value, simply because of the fact that each use case, even if you take a cohort that you want to service, is large enough in this country to serve, right? So it's always going to be a great market from a consumer standpoint, right? But if you want to serve such a consumer market, then you need to serve those use cases with some enablements. And that's where the startups come. So you've got B2B, you've got B2C, you've got B2B2C, and you've got various such places or areas in the domain that need solving. And people are bringing in investments. Some already know that these things can be solved. in the markets where they've invested, and they say that, okay, this is great to come and replicate in this country, right? So simple thing would be that for Uber, it was not from a perspective of investment, but from a perspective of expansion. So India makes a logical market. There are so many people who will ply, and that gives us a great opportunity to come here. But there can be many investors who come in here and say that, okay, we are focusing on a particular domain of investment, and this is a great market where the same thing can happen. So they will look at things that can allow them to leapfrog and get hyper growth, right? So it makes sense for them, right, fundamentally. But they also worry a lot about saying is that going to happen in the proper, legible, legal way, right? They're all for hyper growth and all of that. But they also worry is that when they look at the startup ecosystem is that how credible this is happening, Earlier, this was a perception challenge significantly because we had less things that was binding things together, right? So today, for example, if I want to build a startup which is going to do some XYZ on UPI or whatever other thing that is there in India, they know there's an India stack on which you're going to build it on. That itself mandates certain things to happen in a particular way. So a startup can't go off whack and do something that is going to completely break something down or become a large systemic risk, either within the Indian ecosystem or for the investor, right? So they have great points to validate now, and there are anchors on the basis of which they can decide innovation is going to be responsible. Does this have a good future? Can this go ahead? And they can test that from the market perspective and continue to invest or grow their investment. So this is definitely a shift right now with the India stack, with UPI established, with CBDC coming up and all of that. If you look at all the e-commerce giants over here, everybody is looking at CBDC seriously. All the new guys are looking at it seriously. Now you're looking at, I can get vendors, suppliers, everybody over there, right? It's a network. They're okay to depend on that. We've seen this with MasterCard. We've seen this with Visa. They were private. They were not even, from a bank perspective, came out from there, but it's a different matter, right? Today you look at it, the government is behind it, right? So the public-private partnerships are really, really expanding. People are far more confident and coming and investing into this. And the startups are also becoming more credible because they're working on something that is credible. They're working on a base, and which is where the platform approach matters, right? Any place where you see that platforms have been put together, they know that a lot of the large concerns are well addressed. So if you're coding into that platform, then it works. So if you're coding into UPI stack, you're working with this, you know that it is going to be credible. Why? Because regulations, the required governance and other rules are defined for it.
Right.
You also as a startup can be advised well because there's a framework. So for example, earlier, like I said, payment was a closed ecosystem run by a few players in XYZ. Now it's an open ecosystem, right? We're getting open banking and payments to converge in one place, right? There's other convergence happening from the commerce to payments in one way and so on and so forth. So now when you look at this, you're also seeing cybersecurity converging with payments, right? Why? Because the landscape that you have to deal with from where you're going to get entered and what you're building your stacks on, you're building it on protocols that are web protocols. You're building it on networks that are web networks. You're going on cloud. You're publicly accessible. So you're going from closed private networks to public networks, and your hybrids that you're building, right? So your enterprise, you're also service providers, right? So you look at the dimensions that the companies are getting into, what the market is getting into, and that's where we see some very solid regulations that were built in the US, like NIST and all of these, right? That are very actively cultivated, large community, solid government backing, right? And so on and so forth. So you see tremendously well-developed frameworks coming from matured markets, right? But you can't just take them and apply them as it is. These are good guidances. These are good ways of thinking about what all needs to get covered and all of that. And then there is a specific aspect of how do you bring it into implementation? What do you adapt? How do you adapt that into where you are? And that's why I always say that payments is locally global and globally local, right? But this is not just true for payments anymore. It's literally when you look at digitalization and a lot of these other kinds of things, right? Digital is no longer, what is digital strategy, right? Every strategy is almost digital, right? You cannot have no digital in any strategy that you're creating, right? So when you start looking at that, you start seeing these frameworks come in, these frameworks having interpretations, these having definitions, right? This being put forward in terms of what you should have as controls and all. And then there are innovations in terms of how do you implement those where you are. Because you can leverage a lot of things. Now, how I would implement security in a closed data center from an enterprise hosting perspective versus a cloud would be different. On a cloud, I may have more provider options. I may have agentless things that are much more easier to do. I can have an AWS or a Google or an Azure already provide some of the things that I can hook into, right? Which already tells me that if I'm building something, I'm already above the baseline, and then I have to do XYZ, that is a delta, right? So, like I said, there are companies like what QRC does and all, right, where you bring in that interpretation, you bring in the expertise, you tie that in and all of that. And there is the whole implementation that can also be made much better, much more nimble, because security is relative. Exactly. Nobody can claim 100% security, right? But you want to stay above a line and you want to be in control, you want everything visible, and you need to be able to respond quickly, right? So there is a big dimension of implementation that needs to be this. Now, if you put a control which makes you respond too slow, right? The vector and the impact and the risk is a very different thing, right? This is where the technology convergence of this. So you're seeing AI/ML based fraud models. What is that? You are now seeing agentless agents that are monitoring everything in the traffic, accesses and everything else. This is something you can't eyeball. You can't put 4 people looking at it, right? So we talked about straight through processing in payments, right? So if you're going to put straight through processing, you want to manage only the exceptions so that 99% goes through, 1% you manage as an exception. I'm just throwing a number, but that was the whole point, because you're getting efficiency. Now, when you put AI/ML, efficiency at what cost, what risk? What if something wrong happens? Because nobody is looking at it, right? Or you have built too many rules and something changed you didn't know. So there are aspects of responsible AI and frameworks around that, cybersecurity, all of these are coming together, and it is improving things, right? And the implementations are also improving themselves. But I think one fundamental concept is that, are you secure by design? So you have to think about security as built in and not bolt on, right? Because if you keep doing bolt on, right, it's going to load you down. It's going to pull you back. There are going to be too many things that are not connected. Then you start thinking, am I really focusing on my product, or am I trying to solve one problem in a very complicated way, right? So I think that's where the dimensions come together.
And I think you have mentioned a few things which have taken the baseline on cybersecurity, and you said that's security by design. And if I come to you, Vamsi, and I will ask, what is that baseline? What should be the minimum benchmark that we should be putting up? After that, okay, it's maybe a luxury, but baseline, can you define that for me?
See, baseline, there are, as Rajeev was already mentioned, there are so many frameworks are there. Like whether you take it, NIST, CIS, or the PCI, payment card industry, or the ISO. So all these are the best practices at a baseline level. I mean, there is nothing, yes, definitely after certain, like for example, if you take the ISO 27000.
Yeah, what is there? What is the baseline? What should I be taking? I know ISO 27000 people have heard about it.
Yeah.
But out of that, what should I be taking care of?
It's very simple. It's like, all these frameworks, they comes with a kind of a risk-based approach. Point number 1, a risk-based approach. And like, for example, if you take ISO 27001, there is one particular domain called security principles, or the system design principles. What is that? It is, I can link with that to the application which is, or the stack which is somebody is developing. Okay, if you look at that, it is talking about, have you identified all the risk related to the security in terms of the particular product? If you are identified, then what is the design specific? Have you defined the design specification, and have you developed that application as per the design specification or not? At the same time, whatever the requirements, like just I mentioned the KYC kind of a thing, right? For the particular wallet system, these things supposed to come into the specifications. Like whether you take the input validations, output validations, or the meeting the specified requirements or not, all these things mentioned in one specific control area, domain area. So this is one of the example which I am talking, which is because why I am telling you that particular domain. It is already whatever we are discussing, it is linked with that. If any company take care of that particular domain, their job is done. Awesome. Apart from that, there are because it's the people process technology and the CIA. There are principles are there, right? So these guidelines talks about how to the governance structure in your organization, or the responsibilities in your organization, and the designing of that product or the services, and also very important, what is your expectations from the stakeholders, whether it is a regulatory body, whether it is a consumer. So you have to understand these basic things. Accordingly, you start developing the things. Apart from that, how to secure that Generally it talks about organization level controls or the people level controls or the technological related controls. Like for example, the POS, the point of interaction devices. If you take in the 27,000 or the payment card industry, they're talking about, because there is a lot of unattended equipments are there, or the the POS are not very regulated, or the controlled environment they sit. Okay, so there should be a process to verify whether it is a tamper detection, is there tamper protection controls are implemented or not implemented, whether whoever actually using that particular devices or the equipments, whether they're well equipped with the training to understand if there is a tamper happen, whether they can able to recognize that. So all these are very basic level only. Okay, but when all these things come together, whether it is asset management, whether it is incident management, whether it is a application security or the network security or the point of interaction devices, so once everything comes into the picture, then this will make sure that organization having a very good best practices in terms of the governance risk compliances. Okay. So this is what in
That's the
nutshell.
baseline. Great.
So I'll give you a perspective from our side, right? Any company that is into payments, right? Typically, the problem is that you've got so many global standards. You've got CIS, you've got NIST, you've got all of that, right? You will read, you will agree. Why? Because they are well thought out frameworks. They mean to get the right things done at the right place and all of that. Then you will also have a definition from Visa on PCI, various PCIs. You're going to have something that can come out from the regulator, which is regulatory requirements in terms of cybersecurity. You can have something else also there. Now, in any organization, you're building systems, right? So people, process, information systems, right? Information data and system. There's also privacy regulations on data. There's also localization regulations on data, right? So when you start looking at that, it becomes a very complicated set. Now, what do you comply to? If I have to build one system that has to comply to all of them, I may be overbuilding, over engineering stuff, because I may not need all of that for what I am doing, right? So one of the important things is to understand what is it that we do, and in terms of that, what is it that we need to have to look at as risks, and what do we need to take care of? What is security in context? What is risk in context? This is very important, right? And that's where, what Vamsi was saying is that the first thing is to come and understand that about who you serve, what do you serve them, and how are you intending to serve them for, right? And then come down to this, and then against that, look at all of these things. And if you look at, any company, right, any CISO will know that there is a whole thing called policies. Right? If you look at ISO 27001, what does it come? It's ISMS policies. Now, are all ISMS policies the same? No. ISMS says there will be policy for this, policy for this, policy for this. These are the controls, XYZ. Now, I'll ask any other company saying, what's your password policy? They'll say it's 8 characters, alphanumeric, these special characters allowed, not allowed, whatever. I'll say no, mine is 12. Why? It makes it more secure, difficult to remember. Some other person will say, no, but this will be, what you know and what you have. So we also have got this. So we got MFA into place. So we've added authentication versus password only and all of that, right? So what you see is it's not just the first part of it. It's also evolutions to this, because with every new release of the standard, they try to tighten things, they try to make things better, right? But it's very important to have one clear view and say that what will I do which can comply to the best of what is being said, right? So if I do this as one implementation, this makes us secure, it addresses the risk properly and all of that. So whether it is NIST, whether it is CIS and any of the other things, or RBI and all of that, I'm good, right? So how do you not over-engineer is when you really look at in context, how are you putting together what your security requirements are, what your control requirements are, what your governance requirements are, who checks what, maker should not be a checker, 4 eyes principle will check. If you're doing AML, who's the 4 eyes? What will you do, right? And so on and so forth. So I think this is very important. And this is why, in terms of partnerships, we need to work with people who truly understand this, for whom it is bread, butter and jam, right? So their bread, butter and jam and our bread, butter and jam should come together. And that's why I said the interpretation, conundrum should come to something that is fairly clear for us to pursue and also to evolve together. So sometimes it happens is you do just assessments. Assessments will tell you good, bad, ugly about certain things. There has to be somebody to advise you to say that, okay, what can you do now that something is not so good or something needs to be better. But at the same time, you need to get to where it needs to get. Now take this problem down to the regular engineer. Are we going to say all our engineers are security experts? No, they have to be security aware. But if they're coding to a platform where security by design is the way in which you work, the principle in which you work, and you're ensuring things, right? And that is already looked by the person who is assessing you, and they're saying that, oh, this makes sense this way. You can think about it this way. You should put something that is credible. So if anything is built around this, then you already take care of this, right? So you're not trying to solve the problem or reinvent the wheel again and again. You can be far more efficient, far more focused, far more potent in what you're building and putting out. And your maintainability, your manageability, your evolutions can also be handled. So I always look at compliance as a service, right? Just like when we talk about solutions as a service, software as a service, platform as a service, we also need to think about how can we think about risk, compliance, security as a service? What layers and levels it needs to be at? And do we have a framework that we have come up with after looking at all of this, where somebody is constantly looking at all of that and say, hey, you know what, this is all what applies to you. These are the best practices. This is what you can do, which allows you to cut across and do this relevantly for what you need. So you're not boiling the ocean. You're actually, looking at the elixir that you need to have, right? Like we say, Sanjeevani Booty, right? So that's fundamentally, I think, so is fantastic when you are able to do that. When you look at compliance as a service, when you look at, the risk management and everything as a service. So you need to partner because you can never know everything, right?
You in agreement, Vamsi?
You should never say that you can know everything, right? So you need to work with the right kind of people. And that's what like people like NPCI, everybody has done. Public-private partnerships, innovating together, building risk frameworks together. So today we've got problems of what we call as money mules. Now imagine if the bank didn't come together to form a consortium like NPCI, or IRDA didn't form a consortium for claim fraud, right? Where data can be shared that I found a money mule by some analytics that I've run. If I can put that details of the money mule on one place where everybody can share it, I can prevent this money muling happening no matter which endpoint he touches on this network, because we are all connected to it, right? And it's use based. So am I sharing data or am I sharing intelligence? Right? That's the difference.
Already, or it has started.
You have seen, right? Various things that have started to happen. There are formal entities being formed. There are partnerships, JVs being formed. There are public-private things coming together. And I think that's what you have to see. Even policies are being formed together. Today, if you look at it, RBI doesn't do unilateral policies. NPCI doesn't do unilateral. They invite working committees, which consist of people like us who have been in the industry for a long time. And we take a view of what can work, how can we evolve this, okay, what can be a good starting point, and that continues to work. So it's not one day we did something and the problem is solved, but the very fact that things are fluid, things will change, but to stay on it and stay on it together. I think this is very, very important to understand, and not look at saying is that, oh, I want to get an assessment and let me get an assessor, right? You need to, if it is security by design, then you need their involvement ahead of time also, right? And you need to work with the right kind of partners who can do this for you.
And you were about to add something that time.
No, actually, I'm totally agree with Rajeev. There are two things which I noted. One is the compliance as a service. That's point number one. That's very, very important. And also, there should be some kind of, you also asked me that, what is the minimum benchmarking best practices? That's what, you see, there are a lot of different frameworks are there. As Rajeev already mentioned that, it starts from the local regulators to national level, international level, and there are a lot of statutory, regulatory, contractual, there are a lot of obligations towards that particular entity. Now coming to the point, like there should be a need of a common control framework, or the common control framework where at least it should talk about, hey, these are the minimum things you are supposed to do to meet all these hundreds of regulations. Okay, so in fact I did a work on that. If you ask me, like, we have identified almost like around 15 to 20 different frameworks, including the NIST, ISO, or the payment card industry, even, like the recent RBI, IT, GRC and all this stuff. Then do you think, when I checked at everything, all the requirements built it, the controls, comes around hardly 25 to 26 control areas and hardly 400 plus controls. If any company actually follow this, they can meet all these regulatory requirements, any requirement you name it.
Okay.
In their context.
Yeah. So then, and
we talked about baseline, right?
that's the baseline. Second thing, the compliance as a service. You see, most of the time now the products which is there in the market, that only their focus is the audit management. You see, audit management is something different. and the compliance management totally different. Okay, audit management is what, okay, these are the things, you just supply it and okay, it is fine or not fine, applicable, not applicable, whatever it is. But as a compliance, it is a business as usual, you have to build that. Okay, like whether it is a risk management, whether it is a vulnerability management, it is a compliance management, it's a continuous process. It is not like yearly once you did it and you good. No, the risk management, like for example, you did a vulnerability assessment or the penetration testing or any kind of a testing, and there is some open point. It is a risk for the organization. So now what is happens, most of the organizations, these two different verticals altogether do different function, all the heads. The vulnerability management generally taken care by some IT or somebody. The risk is the risk officers. He doesn't know what is happening at this level, IT level, and IT person doesn't know what is the risk impact on the organization. This should come together. Okay, not only that, even the compliance operational risk, because you see most of that we talks about, okay, infrastructure level risk, okay, you run at the scans and whatever the open points, it's a technological risk. When it's to the compliances, whether you are following as an organization, whether you are meeting all these regulatory requirements or the whatever the regulatory bodies, it's a compliance risk, because there is heavy penalties if you are not doing something which you are supposed to do. The third one is your operation risk. That is very, very important for the business point of view, because I don't care, the technology risk is not there and compliance, and both are fine, but operational risk is also very important. That's where that last one, it comes into the picture. You have to protect not only your consumers, even your business also. So all these things supposed to come together. Then you have to take the risk-based approach. Then you can take certain, calls on that. Okay. So compliance as a service is very, very important. It starts from the day one. I mean, the starting your idea to continues. There is no never ending. It is never ending.
So it's not like the partner takes over compliance, right? Compliance is your responsibility.
Yes,
exactly. You can, and risk is your risk. But working with somebody who is through the life cycle, who is there to guide, to make sure that the enablements are right, to ensure. It's very weird to go back to a place and say that, we did an assessment and you're non-compliant in these 10 places. What then? What after that? Right? So there is reactive and there is proactive. Right? And the risk-based approach, if you are approaching it with a partnership view and you're looking at it across the life cycle, you look at security by design, but what's the spec that the developer has to execute? Like authentication, right? Very simple. Every system needs to authenticate. You build two applications, they need to talk to each other. So when you go to a platform and you have one authentication service, you can be dead sure that that authentication service is built by an expert team, small expert team. You don't need 20 people to do it. And it is done and built and it is vetted and validated to the design concept, right? That we talked about, that it is happening in the best way and in the most efficient way possible, right?
Fair enough.
So that way. So
Okay,
that was the
and
concept.
I think in the previous question you were talking about AI, ML and all that stuff. Maybe I will also like to understand that what emerging technologies are playing role in the payment industry, specifically blockchain. A lot of things are happening. AI, ML is getting introduced. RPAs are there. Automation is happening. What is your point of view and how future the emerging technologies will make the future of this payment industry? And also follow-up question will be for you, Vamsi, that how these technologies are playing role in the compliance or regulatory stuff, and are our regulators are ready for this? I'm coming back to you on that, but yeah, you're from the tech perspective and then maybe from regulation. Yeah.
Sure. Look, it's a given that we have to leverage AML, right? There are so many use cases that are going to get well addressed because of that. One of the things that you talked about, payments, right, which is, I think so, the poster child is the fraud, right? Everybody is talking about how do we stop fraud, or how do we manage risk due to fraud, and so on and so forth, right? We talked about experience and efficiency dimensions, right, that everybody is targeting. Now, when you start looking at something beyond fraud and say that, okay, beyond fraud, what are the kind of use cases that you can think about AI and ML? So straight through processing is very simple. You want money to move faster. You want things to integrate credibly. You want rules to be affected properly so that there is no manual touching and all of that is happening. You want to have something that you're going to look at managed by exception, right? Where it comes into a queue, you manage that specifically and then you resolve that if you see it as a high risk item and all. So now you're still looking at orchestrating a lot of things. And also that also means not just orchestration, but automating a lot of this orchestration and the integrations and the exchange of information regarding this. So when you start looking at that, you're automatically looking at things like robotic process automation, you're looking at AI, because these are the technologies that exactly allow you to do all of these things. You look at ML because it has models that allows you to predictively assess something or post facto assess something or just assess it in facto, like fraud processing. Does this have something that our vector is telling us, right, and where we have got a network is telling us, oops, block this transaction, do the authorization, but don't send success, keep it pending, right? I want to implement a hold and release mechanism or do something different. So it was there already, but now it is getting into the forefront of the core processes and into the core parts of things. It's no longer about saying is that, oh, we use a lot of people to do this process. Now RPA is going to automate the process, so I don't need these many people to do the process. I've always believed that when I looked at our risk team or anybody of that sort, for that matter, is that these guys have got so much experience of managing all these little use cases of risk that have happened over the years. Now, how can I take that and put that into a system that does that well, and these guys elevate themselves to the next level, where with this system they are able to do better. They're able to address millions in scale. They're able to do that, right? So we've got a lot of IP that sits within the company, right, that we are able to derive from these different systems. But can we combine AI? Can we do something which allows us to take this to the next level? Even productize it, right? To say that, hey, we use this, but you know what? This is very useful for you too, right? So that's something that is coming out, and ML is obviously allowing us to do things that we can't do, right? It's so you define some, you ask something to do it, and it can do it multitudes of times better, right? It doesn't get tired, it doesn't sleep, it doesn't do exercise and all of that. So the idea is not about saying that, oh, AI and ML to do coding, for example. Can you code? Yeah, standard functions it can code, it can assemble something, but you need somebody experienced to look at that and say this is right, right? So the idea is about elevating what we do, and in that elevation the evolution is addressed, right, for the thing. So I think that is important, but we need to do it with frameworks like responsible AI and all of this, right? Because like anything that doesn't have controls, anything that is not visible, anything that can go offhand is difficult. Like for example, if I put a wrong credit, how will I get the money back? Right? I need permission, I need to go whose account, I need to talk to the bank and all of that. So there are still processes and mediations required for that. I can possibly put a reconciliation or guarantee a particular transaction to be accurate on a blockchain, but I can't do real time on it because it's consensus based, and real time needs to move very fast. So it's a combination of technologies. There's no one technology that's a hammer for everything.
But everyone is talking about blockchain because you mentioned that. So is it actually going to impact the real-time transactions, or
it is not for the processing itself, but it is meant for a lot of other values that you can put around, like reconciliation. Why do I reconcile? I simply reconcile because when I look at mutability, immutability, that is a question in mind when I look at a ledger, right? So how do I trust this guy's ledger versus that guy's ledger? So I get the both match up and see, okay, what got missed, what got it. I trust this now I'll make the money happen. Next or they say, we have our own systems, we'll pay the money, but tell us anomalies so that we can question this later, or we can figure this out later, or we can ask questions about it. So people are going from post facto to facto and pre facto, right? So when you start looking at things like that, right, it makes sense. So when you put a blockchain based system where you know that I'm talking between two parties, assurance is there, and nobody can go and tamper that stuff, then I can basically not require to do reconciliation to the scale and extent that I'm doing today. Because reconciliation, one is okay, I got a status, which is one part, which is at the transaction level. But you have to send money and all of that, what reconciliation that I can blindly depend on? And does that need to be real time? Unless each transaction I'm settling at the same time, which you will get to at some point. But even when I do UPI and all that, I see the money, but there is still a process around it where that goes. But for larger B2B transactions and other kind of things, or document exchange, that I signed a contract, we put a smart contract. So if all these conditions are met, smart contract is met, now through blockchain I will. Those kind of things meet. Today we do it on land records and other things, but it has good applications on payments also. But you can't take that hammer and put it on real time on the front of it, because that's not what it is supposed to apply to solve for. So I think as technologists, we also need to be keenly aware of the kind of technology options that are coming in. Stacks are evolving. So if you take that into consideration, I think so we should be able to do that. And I think good things are happening. So technology is giving the leverage. Somewhere technology is the business, but at the end of the day, technology is what serves the business. We should always take that in mind, keep the business in front of us, serve what is needed, and do it as best as we can.
And your perspective, Vamsi?
Actually, what Rajeev has mentioned is one point, the responsible AI, whether it is AI or ML, as he rightly mentioned, what you feed, it will only learn from that. The other side of the coin, definitely AI and ML, that kind of technology is being, it is very useful when it comes to the processing lot of data or the feeds to come out with a particular analysis, the predictive analysis in terms of the compliances or the cyber security point of view or the detection of the frauds. There are a lot of places where this particular new technologies definitely makes some difference. There is no doubt in that. But at the same time, it only makes difference when what you feed, what you to that particular model. Okay, because it cannot tell you what is right or wrong. What you feed depends on that. Whatever the learnings through the feeds, then only it will tell you the outcome. It will give the some outcome. So here actually still it is not very regulated, the AI. Already AI is came into the market and people are starting using like okay, we are AI enabled products or AI innovations and everything, but it is very early stage, very early stage. Point number one. Second thing, the responsibility, it is a responsibility of the entities who are actually adopting that technologies. One is adopting the technology, second one is using the technologies to innovate something new. Okay, so this is where actually the models which they are actually designing, what kind of a models, whether the models, what kind of a data they are actually feeding into that particular model to generate certain outcomes. So this is where actually they have to actually there is a need to have a proper regulated frameworks. Even though there are certain standards are available in the market, but it's too early to comment on that. But yes, definitely there are two sides of this AI thing. One is the good part is yes, definitely what Rajeev has already mentioned. AI never sleep. They never go for vacation or anything. It's never tired. But at the same time, it will definitely good for the predictive analysis in terms of all the things. But the other side is if the kind of organization if they are feeding it in a negative manner, then definitely the outcome is also we cannot imagine. It can go beyond our imagination.
This can be beyond what we can
right? Think. So it is too early for the AI, but yes, from my personal perspective, there should be a proper regulatory framework has to be there. The people who are adopting or they are using, they have to take care of that in the design phase itself. So this is from my side.
So just 2 points, right? Standards are good, but the problem is there are many of them, right? So the baselining, we talked about it a little bit earlier. So when I go to a customer of mine and he says, your PCI DSS level certified, I say yes. He knows I'm at a particular standard. He knows what they get because of it, right? Because at the end of the day, it's their payment getting processed. It might be my system, but it's their risk, right? Tomorrow something goes wrong, it's their risk. It's going through my system. So standards always help you say that you're on a baseline, which is an acceptable baseline, but that does not mean everything, right? On top of that, you take certain measures that puts you at a level from where you are comfortable in operating what you need to operate, delivering what you need to deliver, and ensuring that trust is maintained at all times, right? And since that's evolved, there needs to be a process, there needs to be partnership to make that happen, right? Responsible AI, like you said, there are frameworks coming up, smart people are working on it, some offerings are coming up. But like I said, that even like data privacy, there are standards, but not necessarily everywhere the same, right? So some of these standards, some of these bodies are coming up in parallel, but that does not mean that we cannot do AI, right? Maybe in certain use cases, it will be regulated more strongly than certain other use cases. It can be standard. Like for example, if I want internal operation efficiency, I can use AI. But if I'm dealing with people's money and if it's going to take decisions on money, and there is something significant like cross-border payments, you said, if money goes out, how do I bring it back? But it was a fair instruction. It went out. Now what? So those kind of things are there, right? So people on the domain side also bring that flavor onto it to tighten that specific to the domain and what has to happen. So in data privacy, just like data privacy, localization, responsible AI also standards are being developed, and it's a good space to watch and be a part of.
Fair enough, and I think overall I learned a lot of things today from this particular conversation. And my last segment of the interview specifically, where I ask both of you to talk to audience directly. Okay, so for you specifically, let's say that someone who is watching this particular episode and they are going to start a new product in the payment industry or some in the payment side, right? So Rajeev, from your point of view, as a startup, what should I be taking care of to have the best use of technology and provide the best experience? And from you, Vamsi, specifically as a organization, when I'm starting, how I should be prepared or what should I be taking care so that I meet my regulatory and compliance?
So my guidance to startups, right, based on what I've seen, and this comes from quite a few years of working with startups, both directly as well as startups as partners, startup as for partners for innovation or new things, right, that you can do. Responsible innovation is key. Also, you are solving the problem of a domain, right? Even technology is a domain, but let me just talk about fintechs. It's the financial domain, right? You got various subdomains within that, like payments and various other things. So when you're solving the problem, you need to responsibly solve it, right? A disruption is a good disruption, right? As long as it takes care of things that it needs to take care of, right? So for example, if you're going to bring an efficiency in a process, then the efficiency should not break something else, right? The efficiency should give what you need, and then it should give value that is accretive. So think of it as domain tech, because nowadays tech drives all products, because consumption is digital, the channels are there and all of that. So I think it's very important that you pick the right frameworks, the right approach, the right stacks to build things, right? Talk to people in the domain because they have a wealth of knowledge and information. Understanding the as is as important as the to be that you're going to get to. The to be is credible if your as is understanding is solid and you've considered those in what you're building, right? There are aspects like security by design and other things that you should always take care of when you're building things. These are not problems that you solve later. Like I say, product is not just tech. It's not just the fundamental engineering. You're engineering to solve a lot of things. You're engineering to solve scalability, security, resilience. So when you talk about experience, all of these things matter because all of these contribute to experience, right? So there are multiple dimensions to consider. Work with partners, work with people who know the area. When you are making your MVP, consider these things, right? So that tomorrow it is not, completely stripping down something and rebuilding all the things, but it is something which you are able to evolve. Because I think the approach, as we call it, is that, an evolving incremental approach is always good. When you're a startup, you're not going to build everything, right? So when you're building it also, you need to think about how you're solving for this, think about platforms that you can use, how things can become much more credible in what you're putting out. So I would strongly suggest that you do that. Consider the right partnerships, work with the people, right? And build this into what you do.
So, thank you, Rajeev. Vamsi.
Yeah. For me, any fintech, any entities which are into the payment domain, because payment domain is very, very highly regulated domain. Because here the public interest is involved here. So what I generally highly recommend to the companies which they are coming into the payment domain industry, or they want to serve the public. So first of all, they have to understand what is their company objective, what kind of problem they are solving. That is point number one. Second, within that particular domain, who are the regulated entities, what is their expectations from this particular product or the service which you are going to develop or deliver. Third one is, because since it's a kind of domain, as I mentioned, it's very highly regulated, so definitely the security is also very, very important, and making always the right decision in terms of the compliance is also very, very important. So first thing is the regulated, what is the requirements, and understanding the requirements at the beginning stage so that you can design that product or the service in line with this particular requirements is point number one. At the same time, you have to give a utmost importance to the security aspects, because it is a public will get impacted with your service or product in future. And definitely if that is the case, then regulatory bodies, they never keep silent. They will take a lot of actions against you. So the security, you have to give the utmost importance, priority to the security while designing the product and services. Also make sure you are always compliance to not only that regulatory bodies, even your interested parties. Okay, the compliance as a service, basically as a compliance, you have to make it as a business as usual from the day one only. This is what my recommendation. Once it is done, it's good to go. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Vamsi, and thanks, Rajeev, for all your valuable input. So, last, I think for my show, we have a small goodie bag which is on the GB show, and this time it's powered by QRC. So I will like Vamsi to hand it over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, guys, I'll see you next week. Till then, take care. Bye bye.